Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Salvage Performance, where I take this 2003 G35 and turn it into my track car. Have you ever gone driving down the street and you hear this roaring sound, but it's not your exhaust, and you notice that when you take the steering wheel and you turn left and you turn right, that sound will either disappear or reappear? You could be dealing with a bad wheel bearing like I am here on the back of this G35. Now here I have the entire assembly. What this allows me to do is just unbolt that one and bolt this one in its place, and I won't have to use a press or anything like that. Plus I got this for $25. Shipped to my house through eBay. With these cars becoming very popular with drifting and stuff, it's pretty easy to come across parts. Now, if you do not have a press to press a wheel bearing in, why not just do it the easy way? Find someone who's parting out their car, offer them $20, $30, and chances are they'll sell this to you because it's pretty cheap and they're pretty plentiful. Now, there are a few steps to replacing this part. What you have to do first is, of course, jack up the car, remove the lug nuts, but you're going to want to punch out this center cap so you can put the wheel back on and put the car back on the floor. What that's going to allow you to do is take your socket and your breaker bar and break that nut loose. That's going to be your axle nut. It's one of the hardest ones to take off. So having a breaker bar, maybe even an extension for your breaker bar, is really going to help you out here. With the car jacked up and a stand underneath it, I'm going to take off this wheel. I'm going to punch out this center cap, and we need to remove this pin right here so that we can have a straight shot to that nut. I'll probably end up spraying it with some PB blasters since I don't know when that was last removed. Easy enough with this pair of dikes. We're able to remove this pin pretty simply. And after we get this off, we're going to take some WD-40 and just spray it inside. This way, hopefully it makes it a little bit easier to remove that nut. I believe this is going to be a 32mm. If you do not have one, places like AutoZone and Pep Boys, O'Reilly's, I believe they still offer the service where you can rent the tool, the socket, for the price of the socket, and when you return it, they give you a complete refund. So don't worry if you don't have it, you can always just rent it. But back to putting this wheel on so that we can break this thing loose. Alright guys, I was mistaken. The socket is actually a size 36. And when I put this wheel on, I noticed that this hole right here is not going to allow me to fit the socket in. So that method is it's not going to work. Well, at least not with this wheel. I have this RX-8 wheel that I had in the backyard, and it looks like that should fit just fine. So it's the same 5x114 lug pattern. I'm just going to throw it on here temporarily so I can break that axle nut loose, and we'll go from there. With the RX-8 wheel in place, everything on the floor, take my 36mm socket, my cheap Harbor Freight breaker bar. By the way, these do break. They tend to break right here, and I've done it 3 times already. But with a lifetime warranty, I keep it. Now, we can just put it on here, like so, and with this pipe, just slide it onto here. And what this is going to allow me to do is scratch the hell out of my car. No big deal, it's a track car. But we can extend it out, so if we need more leverage, we can just pull it out to here. We have about a it's more like a 4-foot breaker bar. And that was not good. And it's good for me that I don't have to struggle to try to remove the nut. But it doesn't give me security. That nut just came right off. I can remove it with my fingers. Wow. Kind of makes me wonder about the other things done to this car. Well, no big deal. Again, guys, breaker bar, 36mm. Wheel on the floor so that you can break this thing loose without the whole assembly spinning on you, because sometimes these axle nuts are on there really tight. I have had the e-brake fully engaged, and even with the e-brake fully engaged, everything's spinning. Now, it could have been because the e-brake was weak, which is another thing I have to adjust on this car, because right now, if I pull that e-brake, it will not lock up the wheels. It'll slow the car down, but will not lock them up. So that is definitely something I'll need to do before I go drifting. Drifting's still further on down the line, but we should take care of that soon. Car's in the air, wheel is off. Now, this caliper will have to come off, as well as the rotor, but we're going to leave this caliper on, so that way when we're spinning the axle to get to the other side of it, the top part of it up here, we can reach the bottom nuts at the moment, but when it comes to reaching the top ones, that sounds pretty dirty, we're going to say bolts. When it comes to reaching the top bolts, we're going to have to rotate it. Now, if we do not have something to stop the axle from rotating, it's going to make it to where as we apply pressure to break those bolts loose, your entire axle is going to spin. So we're going to use this for now. We're going to take this off last. But let's go underneath and see how everything looks. Now, I've had this car for a little while now. As you can see, Spider has made its home here. I wonder what kind it is. Looks like a tarantula web. Nah, I'm just kidding. We have a lot of black widows out here, so later on in this video you might see me scream. But those are the axle nuts I'm talking about. You have a total of 6 of them, so we'll be able to reach these 6 right now. But after we break these 6 loose, these 3 loose, we're going to have to rotate that axle in order to get to the other side, which will then be on this side. Then we're going to use the e-brake to lock it in place, and it should be good. When I bought this car, it already had these camber arms, as well as the coilovers. If you guys happen to know what brand this is, please leave it in the description. I have no idea. And my knowledge about this car is still pretty new, so yeah, if you can, identify them. These coilovers are, I believe, man, what's that name? What's that brand? I should say it on it. I remember, it's a pretty familiar brand. Tanabe, that's what it was. Tanabe coilovers. These are actually really, really smooth, and I'm surprised at how smooth they are, being that they're coilovers. On my other cars, when I put coilovers on them, it could be from Tane, HKS, I had some, other brands have I dealt with? Of course Megan, I've had those ones on. Every single brand that I've dealt with, their springs or their coilovers are extremely rough. These ones here, these are great for daily driving, but since I'm going to take it to the track, it's probably best that I get something with a stiffer spring rate, because these seem to absorb the bumps really well, but I don't know about the body roll. Again, I haven't really driven this car much. If you've looked at my past videos, I have a road trip with about 500 miles on this car. Aside from that, I've taken it to the grocery store a couple times. Well, yeah, back to removing this axle. Hey, real quick guys, if you're not familiar with what a bad subframe bushing looks like, this one is cracked on the top. Let's see if I can get it to focus. You can see the crack right around, where's my finger now? Right around this area. I shine the light on it. And I have noticed that it feels a bit loose, especially when I'm accelerating from a dead stop. I can feel everything back here kind of like shift around. So this was something I was planning to replace in the near future. I'll have a video coming out on this not too long from now. But yeah, this definitely is bad. I have the kit, the energy suspension bushings for here, there, and there. So it's just a thing of getting them installed. Back to removing this axle here. If you're dealing with a Craftsman wrench or anything with a bulky head like this, you might run into troubles trying to get this thing to align. You see how it's gapped right here? You may end up stripping out or rounding off this head on the nut. So the best thing to do is get a thinner wrench. I have a breaker bar here. That's a 3/8. This 3/8 breaker bar has a very thin head on it, allowing it to easily get into here. And if your nuts are on there really tight, then you're probably going to have to add something to extend your leverage. What I did was I took this socket, it's a 5/8, and I put it onto a 6-inch extension, and I just slide it right onto here. And what that does is give me more leverage so that I can break this loose. So I'm going to go ahead and take these 3 nuts off of the bolts, and after I do that, I'm going to go back into the car, release the e-brake, put it into neutral, come back down here, spin this around so I can get to the other 3. Axles out. After having already removed that front nut and those axle nuts, it just slides right out from here. Now what we have to do is remove the caliper and the rotor. We have the caliper bolts and the bolts for the bracket. We're going to have to remove both of those. It turns out the guy who had this before me, or whoever worked on it, they rounded off the head on this 14. So to get this one off, what I'm going to try to do is bypass removing this one and just removing the 2 bracket bolts. These ones here are size 19, and it looks like I can reach both of them without removing the actual caliper. Alright guys, with the 2 bracket bolts off, I was able to get the caliper taken off of the rotor. Now, just as simple as pulling this thing off. Now we can see the wheel bearing, and I'm not sure if the camera's going to pick that up, but that is a roaring sound that you hear when you have a bad wheel bearing. It's really rough, you can feel it as you're turning it. And now with the rotor off, we make our way back here to these 4 bolts. These 4 bolts are size 19. And yeah, it looks like I'm just going to take the breaker bar, break these things loose. Should have plenty of room here. And hopefully this thing comes right out. With 3 out of the 4 bolts already removed, it was pretty simple to get these things. You just take a little extension, put it onto your 1/2" wrench with your 17mm socket, and you just reach around, and from this side I was able to get to all 4 of the bolts that are underneath this plate. And yeah, they are a little tough, but if you just put this on the bolt and you just hit the end of your wrench, kind of like an impact, then you're able to break them loose. And so far, with 3 out and the 4th one coming out, it looks like this is going to fall right off once I remove that 4th one. So once I get this off, I'll show you the difference between the two. And it's out. I'm going to come back here and clean off all this dirt before installing the new used one, but here's the two of them side by side. This one's the one that came out of the car, and this one's the one I'm going to replace it with. Just based off looks, I would say that this one was the bad one. Seeing how this one is in pretty good condition, at least appearance wise, but as I spin this one compared to this one, you can feel the difference. And that grinding noise is what we're hearing as we're driving down the road. So it looks like everything looks the same. So now it's just a thing of cleaning up this hole, prepping this, getting some of this rust off, and putting it back in. Okay, it's back in now. So it was pretty simple. Just slid right in, put the 4 bolts on. I did them hand tight so far. I do need to go back and torque them. The torque for these bolts are going to be 65 foot-pounds, as well as when we go through and reverse the process of removing it to install everything, you're going to have to torque this bolt down to 175. You have your 6 bolts back there for the axle. Each one of those bolts are going to be torqued down to 52 foot-pounds. We have our caliper bracket. So the 2 caliper bracket bolts that I had removed, I need to torque these down to 62. The 2 up here, I was only able to take one or break one loose because the other one was stripped or rounded off. This one here, since I did loosen it up, I will need to torque it back down. This one gets torqued down to 32. Now all these torque specs are based off of forums, so do your research. This is what I am going to torque my nuts and bolts down to. So, you know, if you happen to come across anything different, please leave them in the comments down below so that can help everybody else out. But yeah, I'm not going to record installing everything. It's pretty much straightforward. Just reverse the process of removing it. Now, if you do like this content, I know it's kind of boring. It's just a simple install of a wheel bearing. But in the near future, I will be taking this car to the track. So if you are curious as to what this G35 can do, as well as other cars in the future, this is just my first project. As you can see, it's one of my first uploads. So right now it's just prepping the car. It's prepping it so that I can get it ready to go to the drag strip. I want to get a baseline quarter-mile run for this. I want to weigh it so that I know how much the car weighs before I start to throw modifications on it, start to remove things, to see what the power to weight ratio is like. I would like to dyno the car with it how it is right now, which is pretty much stock, and with full bolt-ons, as well as taking it autocross racing and then drifting. So future mods will be welding differential, hydro e-brake, you know, as well as other maintenance things such as bushings and stuff. But you know, I just if you guys like this stuff, please do subscribe. It's gonna help out the channel a lot. I appreciate you guys watching, and until next time, thank you.